Welcome to part 2 of the inventory tutorials. Today I thought we'd get into the coding, into the event graph, and start building that out because that is quite a task ahead of us. So let's go into inventory, and this is what we've created last episode. Over to the event graph, we built the back button as well so we could get back and forth between the buttons. We're going to keep the tick because, as we've done in other menus, we're going to use that to help focus on our buttons. Don't need anything for pre-construct at the moment, so let's grab event construct. So as with other menus, the first thing we'll do is get player controller, and off that player controller, set user focus. So we'll set focus on the very first thing we want to be focused when the menu begins. In this case, what we want is this inventory slot here. So let's grab that inventory slot. But the inventory slot itself is not something that can be focused on. So let's get button. And it's going to give you a random number here. This is 312. Now, the reason it's giving us a random number is because we haven't defined the button that we actually built in the inventory slot. But that's not a problem. We don't need that to be defined. We just need it to be whatever button is inside of the inventory slot. And there's only one button there, so it's the right one. Next up, the usual get player character and cast to hero. And then let's create a variable called reference hero. One more event we're going to call. We're going to create a custom event, and it's going to be called refresh inventory. And this event is going to be the main driver behind just about everything. So with refresh inventory as the event there, let's go over here and call refresh inventory. And that's it for the event construct. Now, refresh inventory. We need to essentially go through every single item, check what image it has, what it's called, and if there's even anything in the slot. We're going to right click and make array. We're going to then drag in all of our inventory slots, holding control so we don't have to tell it whether it's a getter or a setter. We want to drag them in one by one, and I'll speed this process up. And so we have all of our inventory slots here. And if you wanted to just keep the formatting correct, you could pop over here to this inventory slot and rename it to inventory slot _0, just to make sure that it's been named correctly. So that's all of our inventory slots. And now we're going to turn them into an array. So drag the make array over here, because this is going to take a lot of space. And now you can see why I kept the first inventory slot as 0 and didn't change it to 1 and then use my numbers. So that now, if we want to troubleshoot the array and make sure everything's in its right position, all we have to do is align the inventory slot with its number in the array. And with everything connected, and I was double checking the numbers as I went down, now select all of that and press Q, and it'll all line up nice and neatly like this. So this array is going to go into a for each loop, which we've discussed previously. Basically, a for each loop is going to go through every item in the array and do whatever we specify here to each item. So before we plug in that for each loop, I did forget to do one other thing. Let's hold Alt and click on that. We need to create a Boolean for activate inventory. So basically, whether or not our inventory can be interacted with or not, because there are going to be a few cases where we don't want to interact with it. Next up, drag off the array index. Holding Shift, grab yourself a less than arrow right here, and we're going to punch in the number 25 here. So this array index is referring to the numbers here. So when inventory slot 0 is being checked, that array index is 0. So what we're going to plug in here later is how many items we actually have in our inventory. But for now, we're just going to set that up there because we need to put this branch in the code, and it would be annoying to go and do that again. Another thing we'll check here, and this gets quite complicated, so bear with me if I go back and forth a little bit. We're going to do an is focusable check, because if something is focusable, that's going to tell us whether or not we can interact with it. So those are the first three things we're going to do every single time we refresh the inventory. So the pickup image is going to come from this array element here. Let's pop over here and set pickup image. So this is going to set that variable we set up before in the actual slot to whatever image we put in here. If there's nothing in there, or we've essentially exceeded the amount of items we have, then the rest of it's just going to be empty. So we'll set that image to nothing. But if there is something there, then we'll want to set that image to whatever the item is. And we're going to set that image a bit later on because we're going to have to create our actual inventory for that. But for now, let's continue on. The next variable we'll set, we'll make a little bit of room here so we can cut through with this, is going to be amount. And again, that's going to come when we have the actual inventory ready to go. So next up, let's grab ourselves a do once, because we don't want to do the following script a second time. And on the other end of this do once, we're going to grab a reference from this array over here for another for each loop. Leave a bit of space so we can put a reroutable there. Double click on that and drag that down here. Another double click so we can actually get below the script here, because otherwise we're not going to be able to see a damn thing if we keep this too messy. And the second time we pass through our buttons, we want to set up the button inside the inventory slot. We're going to set that up. Just drag that tab up there over in our inventory slot. So open that up over to the graph, and we're going to create an event dispatcher. So hit the plus sign here, and we're going to call this button was clicked. When we press the button in our inventory slot, which is this button here, 312, which again has no significance, when that button is clicked, we're going to call this dispatcher right here. I'm going to call it. So that's what's going to happen when the button is clicked. The response to that, or the other side of that, is going to come from here. So we need to bind event to button was clicked right here. What this means is when we hit that button, it should fire an event over here. And that event will be custom event button clicked. We'll plug this event here into that. And we'll make some room over here. Drag this all the way down. Yes, that's right. We're probably going to fill up this entire space here. Now, one more thing we'll set up before we move on from this just for today. Let's pop over to the designer and then over to inventory slot. So let's create another variable, and this is going to be called inventory slot. We're going to change this to an integer. Then we're going to hit the I, because this I essentially means we can edit this variable from within another blueprint, like so. Compile and save this now, and then pop over to the menu underscore inventory and click on this inventory slot. Now I have that default variable there. With said default variable, I would like to specify what inventory slot this is. So clicking on inventory slot 1, we're going to call that 1, 2 is 2, and just alter those variables until you are done with all of them.